Zapata offshore's involvement in Cuba and other regions of strategic importance was not limited to the Bay of Pigs invasion. The company's exploration efforts in places like the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean were seen as strategically valuable for U.S. interests. Moreover, the business world and intelligence agencies were often closely aligned in the Cold War context, as companies provided the cover for CIA operations and vice versa. In the case of George H. W. Bush, his position as a businessman with ties to both the oil industry and the CIA made him a key figure in the intersection of corporate interests and intelligence operations. This intersection of business, intelligence, and political power would continue to define Bush's career in the years following the assassination of JFK. The question of conspiracy surrounding the assassination of JFK has been the subject of much debate. While the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination, many researchers and theorists have pointed to a larger conspiracy involving various groups with vast interests in removing Kennedy from power. These groups include factions within the CIA, the military-industrial complex, and the oil industry, all of which were affected by Kennedy's policies. The speculation surrounding George H. W. Bush's potential involvement stems from his connections to both the CIA and Zapata Offshore, a company with substantial interest in areas of geopolitical significance. Kennedy's policies of Kennedy's policies on issues like Cuba, Vietnam, and military bases in the Philippines threatened the interests of powerful individuals in these sectors, potentially making Kennedy a target of a larger conspiracy. While there is no definitive evidence linking George H. W. Bush or Zapata Offshore directly to the assassination of JFK, the connections between the CIA, oil, and politics during this period are worth exploring. The potential overlap of these interests during the Kennedy's administration and the speculative connections between key figures continue to fuel debate and theories surrounding the events of November 22nd, 1963. Lyndon B. Johnson comments about the potential international tensions and the risks of war following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And that stems from several geopolitical and diplomatic factors that were at play during the early 1960s. The assassination of a sitting U.S. president was an extraordinary event, and Johnson, as Kennedy's vice president, found himself thrust into the presidency under a cloud of uncertainty. The comments were likely intended to reassure both domestic and international audiences about the stability of the U.S. government and to emphasize the gravity of the situation. By the time of Kennedy's assassination, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was already in a very tense phase. The U.S. and the USSR were engaged in multiple proxy conflicts across the globe, including the Cuban Missile Crisis just a year earlier in 1962, which had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Kennedy had been widely credited for handling the crisis in a way that avoided direct military confrontation and nuclear escalation. Kennedy's death raised the possibility of an unstable political transition, especially considering that his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, had less experience in foreign affairs compared to Kennedy. Johnson himself was deeply concerned that the Soviets might perceive his administration as weaker or less competent, and he feared that any signs of weakness could provoke more aggressive behavior from the Soviet Union or their allies in Eastern Europe and Asia. This would have been a significant concern given the volatility or the volatile state of global politics at the time. At the time of Kennedy's assassination, Cuba remained a critical issue in U.S. foreign policy. The Cuban Missile Crisis had demonstrated the global stakes involved in any moves related to the Cuban government, which was under the leadership of Fidel Castro, a communist ally of the Soviet Union. The United States had been actively involved in efforts to undermine Castro's regime, supporting anti-Castro Cuban exiles and attempting covert actions, including the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. With Kennedy's assassination, there was uncertainty regarding the U.S.'s stance toward Cuba and the broader Latin American region. Johnson may have feared that any misstep could lead to escalation with the Soviet Union or Cuba, particularly since there had been significant tensions over U.S. military presence in the Caribbean and nearby waters. Additionally, Kennedy had been very vocal about his commitment to the Alliance for Progress, a program aimed to improving U.S.-Latin American relationships. The association raised questions about the continuity of these diplomatic efforts and the potential for instability in the Western Hemisphere. By 1963, the Vietnam War was already an issue that Kennedy had been addressing, though he had not yet committed large-scale U.S. military forces to the conflict. Kennedy had expressed a desire to limit American involvement in Vietnam, especially in terms of direct military combat. He had also spoken about the need for a negotiated settlement to the conflict, although his precise intentions remain a subject of debate. After Kennedy's assassination, Johnson assumed the presidency at a time when U.S. involvement in Vietnam was increasingly under scrutiny. Johnson's remarks about the risk of war likely reflected the concern that instability in Vietnam, along with fears of a Soviet or Chinese-backed expansion of communism, could spiral into broader regional conflict in Southeast Asia. Johnson, who would ultimately escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam, may have been indicating that the geographical risks of the Kennedy assassination could lead to a further escalation in the conflict. The assassination of Kennedy not only shocked the United States, but also had a profound impact on foreign leaders and governments around the world. Allied countries feared that a change in U.S. leadership might affect the stability of alliances, particularly NATO. Meanwhile, adversaries such as the Soviet Union, Cuba, and China might have seen an opportunity to exploit the uncertainty surrounding U.S. leadership. Kennedy had cultivated a reputation for being a strong, charismatic leader of the world on the world stage. His assassination raised concerns among foreign leaders about the future direction of U.S. foreign policy. Johnson's remark about the risk of war could have been directed at assuaging global concerns that the U.S. would not falter in the face of such a significant loss. He wanted to reassure international allies that the U.S. would remain a stable, formidable global power. Beyond the immediate international concerns, Lyndon Johnson was keenly aware of the need for political stability in the aftermath of the assassination. Johnson had a reputation for his ability to work the U.S. Congress and get legislation passed, but he was aware that his transition into the presidency was clouded by the circumstances of Kennedy's death, as well as the conspiracy theories that swirled around the assassination. Johnson's focus on international tensions and the risk of war could have been a way to solidify his role as president and demonstrate his capability to handle crisis on the world stage. By focusing on the importance of maintaining U.S. leadership and standing firm in the face of global challenges, Johnson sought to reassure both the American public and the international community that the assassination would not lead to instability or chaos on the global stage. In the wake of Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon B. Johnson was not only grappling with the loss of his predecessor, but also the heightened tensions of the Cold War, growing conflicts in Vietnam, and uncertain diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union, Cuba, and other international players. His comments about international tensions and the risk of war were a reflection of the precarious global situation that existed at the time and the political pressure he felt as the new leader of the free world. Johnson's presidency would eventually see the escalation of the Vietnam War and continued confrontation with the Soviet Union, but his early focus on reassuring allies and signaling strength in the wake of Kennedy's death helped to ensure that the United States would not appear weak or divided.